in that they were pretending to be an exponent of one side or the other of this debate, and that they were stimulating that type of divisive thinking inside the culture. And the question is that illegal? And this gets us back to the question that if in fact Russia was doing that, and you've got an internet which is accessible to everybody in the world, and there's somebody doing that, can you make that illegal? Because you think it's disruptive. And if you can make it illegal for Russia to do it, can't you make it illegal for Americans to do it? Because they're causing trouble. They're exacerbating fissures in the culture. They're setting family members against each other, people in the community against each other. That what's happening here is that, and this is a big question, is that Joe Biden is running for president to get things back to normal. He is trying to offer the American people the opportunity to push these things back under the horizon, to stop putting this stuff out in public, stop exacerbating these problems, and let's get things back to normal, like the famous saying of Ronald Reagan. I think I may have told you, maybe. Ronald Reagan was one time quoted as saying, "What's all this talk about a black problem? I remember when there wasn't any black problem." Okay, and so this thing with Trump right now that's happening is stirring up all kinds of potential discussions, like the range of things that we've talked about here today. And let me ask you this: do you think that things are going to calm down again when Trump is gone?
I don't think so. I think he's stirred up so much that if it does calm down, it's not going to be any immediate sort of change. I think depending on who's elected next, like they're going, or if it goes, like a Democrat is elected, I think they're going to try and like slowly kind of calm it down. But I think that so many people have been worked up over this and like now have a voice that didn't before, that they're not just going to like let it go. Especially now that Trump has like brought so many of these controversial like points and kind of made them more mainstream. I think that the people who believe in them are going to try and be fighting to keep them like prominent.
All right. And that's now if do you think it would be preferable to no matter how bad Trump is to just get rid of him by having an election and have him get unelected, as distinct from impeaching him for the things he's done and the way he is?
I mean, of course I'd like to see him be impeached, but I don't know if it's necessarily going to happen. I think it seems to be like moving in that direction, but there's so many factors that an election seems to be like the most likely thing that will get him out.
Well, that was a good dodge. That was worthy of William Barr. No, what I was asking is do you think it would be preferable to have him get unelected in 2020 or be impeached?
I think unelected. I think him being impeached would just give these people that like love him so much and his viewpoints more power, and would almost be, I think they would just be like more inflamed by it, and it would become like a bigger and bigger thing that just keeps growing. Whereas if he's impeached, it's kind of saying like, you may have had this power before, but not anymore.
Do you think that, your personal opinion, do you think he should be impeached, or do you think that he should just be unelected?
I think it's messed up in both ways. I think, like she said, I think that if he gets impeached, then you have people who love him so much who are going to say that, see, it was never a fair fight type of thing. You guys were always against them, and it's just going to spark more of an outrage towards the already existing government. And I feel like if he gets unelected, that's going to happen. It's going to happen either way. I think at this point he has provoked so much. He has done like so much, and people who love him, I mean, like I'm saying, this guy just speaks, and these people just believe what he says, even though there's proven facts that he's saying what he's saying is lies. So I think it's just, if he gets impeached or if he loses the election in 2020, I think it's going to go hectic either way. I would like to see him impeached, but I don't know. I'm afraid of what's going to happen afterwards.
What do you think? Do you think that, would you like to see him impeached or unelected?
I think impeached would be more of like a bigger consequence thing, you know? I think if he just gets unelected, it's like, okay, well, I did my thing and now it's over and whatever, like I got away with it kind of. To me, it's impeached, it's kind of like he's not just getting a slap on the wrist by getting unelected, he's like actually getting a consequence.
And what do you think he should be impeached for?
Just like his like.
I don't think there's an offense.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying like
you know,
just like
I mean,
I'm trying to think of a better word for lying. Just like his complete and utter like disregard for like the truth. And
he's a pathological liar, and therefore is incapable of honestly representing us in the world, and so he should be impeached. That's pretty basic. Yeah, that's pretty basic. What do you think?
I think unelected would be like a fair way of going about it, simply because, like through an election process, you can have a discourse of ideas and actually like defeat his like, ideology, and like even if he keeps like spewing it, like it's the more like successful like way to win. It has a lot more impact, and then simply just, I mean, obviously like impeachment is the route to take when there's actions of treason and like with what happened in the last election to prove that he is incapable of being president. However, the closer we move towards the election, that seems like much more of a reality, and like I said, a much more successful way to win.
All right. Okay, now what about Barr? I mean, do you think Barr should be impeached for what he's done so far?
Well, I mean, honestly, I think he should, but also, like, I think you mentioned about impeaching him and just, like, focusing on him, and I think being impeached, like, for lying, like, is, like, reasonable, but also I think there's some, I think lying and it's just, like, a symptom of, like, the deeper issues that's going on, like, in our political institutions, but I mean, yeah, like, I would like to see him impeached, I guess, but...
Committing perjury to Congress is a crime, and that would be a crime that would be worthy of, because if you can't believe the Attorney General when he comes to testify, then you should have somebody else in there, right? All right. Okay. All right. So here we are. That we've got. You were going to say something.
I do have some thoughts on this impeachment matter.
Yeah.
The point that if he were to be impeached, I think his camp would be ever so inflamed, and that would create a serious divide, even more so in this country. And I think the purpose that would have to be done is because we'd be preserving the institution of the presidency. We could say that you can't be making these decisions and doing these things in that position. I think the unelected prospect could potentially yield more progressive change, because now we have kind of, well, I live in the school of thought that the American political system is deeply corrupted as it is, just with the way that like think tanks influence the government, how the Supreme Court is kind of like pseudo-dictatorship, authoritarian thing that just like simply ratify these things and they're set for life, and that we really kind of like need to rethink what's going on here. And if we were to move forward with this new status of presidency, where there's a lot more power, then we could potentially see some sort of shift in the American political system. It's very sort of radical vision, right? But It could potentially lead us to somewhat of a more progressive and democratic state.
So, but if he goes unimpeached for what he has done, don't you think that it is sending out signals that a person could be a virtual dictator if they get to be elected president and nobody's going to do anything to him?
Yeah, I think it would definitely increase the power of the president substantially.
Right.
There'd be a lot less to check.
And so if in fact, for example, you were to find out that he along with Bolton were having conversations with Eric Prince, and that Eric Prince was in the process of potentially having Blackwater be hired by Guaido down in Venezuela to come in and undertake a military intervention, not the United States, but hire a private firm to come in, a military corporation to come in to attack the military people in Venezuela and put Guaido into power.
Has this not happened before, though? Blackwater was deployed in Iraq for there was a period of time where there were more Blackwater troops than there were American troops.
Yes.
Like, this is a systemic issue that we have with American interventionism. And like, we can't just say Donald Trump is the problem. No, absolutely not. Donald Trump is a symptom of this problem. And the reasons we have to impeach him, I don't think address the problem. I think that we need to just move forward, like we need to really like evaluate our system of governance and whether or not he's truly conducive to representing the people in this country.
And do you think that would be easier to do in the context of an election? And that the candidates might be actually proposing some of these systemic changes in an electoral process, as distinct from a more narrow and kind of technical impeachment?
I do. I think that impeachment would preserve the institutions, how they were prior, and moving forward with this evolution of the presidency would challenge that.
Okay, all right. Yes.
Do you think he can win again? He's not impeached.
Yeah, that's the question. No, nobody believed he could win the first time, right?
And the people that go out and vote are his demographic of people. The people of the Democratic campaign, we don't produce food. We don't produce them out of votes.
Well, they have demonstrated, of course, the Democratic Party has demonstrated in 2 elections now, Alabama and where was it? Where was the other one?
It came really close in Texas.
Yeah, they came close in Texas with Beto, but the other one there was a special election in New Jersey. Okay, but so the bottom line is that with the mobilization of minorities, of black voters and Hispanic voters and black women voters especially, have been extraordinarily effective and absolutely. And the key is probably going to be your generation voting. So it's, yes.
Do you think we will come out? Because I know that definitely they will come out to
Yeah.
vote again. And I don't know if we will for sure.
Well, then doesn't it appear that if in fact the consensus among you may be that it's preferable to have it go to the election and not exacerbate the rage of his 18-20% of the people that are just blindly loyal to him, that it should go to the election? Isn't it therefore incumbent upon you to actually do something much different than you would have been doing otherwise? Because have any of you here ever actually participated in a candidate's electoral process? So what we're coming up with here, in all of the complexities of the issues that are raised by him, the different information that we've talked about in the classes up to now, it seems to devolve to the point of that if in fact one is going to advocate foregoing the impeachment process and subject him to a re-election campaign, the important role that your generation is going to play in voting, that it would seem that it would be incumbent upon you, to each of you, actually start to figure out now, how to become involved in the campaign against him. In the campaign, or if just to be fair, if there's anybody who thinks that it might be even more advantageous to have him in for 4 more years, you can work in his campaign. And, so that what we're trying to figure out here is that in all the discussions that we're having about Trump, about the evidence against him, about the potential collusion with Russia, what are the reasons for him having this love affair with Putin? Was there obstruction of justice? If so, which of the 10 candidates are the best one if you're going to impeach him? If in the context of all of these discussions, you believe that it's preferable to not impeach him and have him go to the election, doesn't it seem that it's incumbent upon you to therefore, not saying that's the wrong decision, but that it's incumbent upon you therefore to become actively involved in the campaign to see to it that he doesn't get reelected? Wouldn't that be clear?
I think it's the wrong decision.
Pardon?
I think it's the wrong decision. I think he should be impeached.
Good. I mean, there's a holdout. There's a holdout here. Get him anyhow. All right. So anyway, what I'd like to ask now is that have any of you read the summaries of either of the 2 volumes? Okay. So I'd like to ask you to do that. So we want to get back to this issue here. There are short summaries at the beginning of the first volume, and you obviously all you have to do is call it up on the internet. Just call up the Mueller Report, Volume 1. Okay, and at the very beginning there's a summary, and this is what it is that Mueller wrote a letter to Barr saying he wanted Barr to publish this. Okay? And the same thing in Volume 2. In Volume 2, there's just a short summary at the beginning. Okay? And because I'm going to ask you, like this again on Tuesday, I'm going to go around, I'm going to ask you what it is how you understand what it is that's being said by Mueller. I'm not going to get into trying to discuss how it's different than what Barr said. That ship has sailed. I mean, the roof is falling in on Barr right now on that. But I want you to take a look at the summary of the Volume 1 and the summary of the Volume 2, and I want you to be prepared on Tuesday to discuss it. Okay? Because this is the primary discussion that is going on in the public policy world inside the United States right now. And I wouldn't want you guys to miss out on it. Okay? So I want you to become informed, at least to the extent of being familiar with the summaries of both volumes. And then I want to chat with you about it on Tuesday. And I want to see what type of subtle thinking that you've done about what's being said there, because there are some subtle things that Mueller is saying in Volume 1. It's definitely not true what Barr says, is that there's no evidence of collusion or what he calls conspiracy. You'll see in there that he isn't saying that. And that with regard to the obstruction issue, he's certainly not saying there's no evidence of obstruction. He's saying something else. And I want you to, in Volume 2, I want you to have a special look at whether or not you think that Mueller was pushing the question, the answer to the question of obstruction, was he intending to have Congress look at that in some kind of a potential impeachment process? Okay? So that's because Barr has said over and over again that, well, since Mueller didn't come up with an opinion about whether or not he was going to charge Trump or not with obstruction, it was up to me to make that decision. And so he did, in the negative, which he'd already written his long memo on earlier, saying that it's impossible basically for the president to obstruct justice, which means that he would have let Nixon off as well. Okay? So that's where we are. Well, what other questions have you got? I'm going to let you guys go a little bit over, but yes.
Just briefly, do we have a Nate Sheehan endorsement for president by any chance from the Democratic candidates we have right now?
No, what we might do, if people want to do it, is discuss the pros and cons of each of the candidates, and also discuss the potential of, like, William Weld is running against Trump in the Republican primary. In case anybody doesn't know that, that's one of the best kept secrets in America right now. But Bill Weld, the former Republican governor from Massachusetts, has announced that he's going to run against Trump in the primary. But it's virtually certain that John Kasich, the governor of Ohio, is going to be running against him as well. And so that we can have that discussion. But I want the discussion, at least at this part of the course, to be in the context of the impeachment. Okay? Because that if there's a consensus among your generation that it's going to be preferable to unelect Trump to impeaching him, then the electoral process is going to be very important here. And then we'll come back and revisit the question of the impeachment once you've read the summaries. Okay? So you'll know the summaries, and you may be surprised by something in the summaries that you haven't seen yet. Okay? Okay. Any other questions before we run out into the outdoors and actually get to breathe? Okay? All right. Okay, kids. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yes, the blockchain is truly revolutionary. Yes, Bitcoin is Tulipmania 2.0. Yes, cryptocurrency is a nail in the coffin of the bankster parasites. Yes, digital currency is a tool of the totalitarian tyrants. No, these statements are not contradictory. But don't worry if you think they are. You're just a victim of the Bitcoin Psyop. This is the Corbett Report. So what is the Bitcoin Psyop? Well, look at a headline like this. Former chairman of Federal Reserve to speak at blockchain conference. If you immediately think, aha, I knew it, the Fed is behind this Bitcoin nonsense after all, then you might want to stop and contemplate this headline from 2 years ago. Ben Bernanke, Bitcoin has serious problems. Do you think there's some kind of contradiction here? Or do you think that Bernanke has flip-flopped on the issue? Or do you suspect that Bernanke was always secretly behind Bitcoin but couldn't admit it until now? If so, then you have fallen for an embarrassingly simple trick. That trick is to use the words Bitcoin and blockchain and cryptocurrency and digital currency interchangeably as if they are all the same thing. They are not. Confused? Well, fear not. Our good friends at the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS, have written a handy-dandy article that explains everything to you in simple, everyday language. They've even illustrated that article with easy-to-understand infographics. Just kidding. Their unwieldy article on central bank cryptocurrencies is a predictably hot mess of monetary jargon and Venn diagrams that somehow make things look even more complicated than they sound. Now, to be fair, their proposed new taxonomy of money has real explanatory power, and the diagrams that result are genuinely insightful, but it hardly makes for light bedtime reading. So let's see if we can make it a little easier, shall we? A blockchain is a cryptographically secured ledger that can be permissionless and decentralized. The geeks in the crowd will appreciate the fact that the blockchain is a stupendously elegant solution to some incredibly complicated problems in the obscure recesses of arcane subjects like distributed computing and payment processing. But for the non-geeks, perhaps this will suffice. Some of the oldest documents ever discovered have been ledgers of one sort or another. Medical records, legal and business contracts, accounting ledgers. As long as there has been civilization, there has been the need for secure and accurate record-keeping of transactions and events. And since the birth of civilization, there has only been one way to keep those records: a system where a recognized central administrator stores, secures, and updates that ledger. Until now, that is. With the advent of the blockchain, an accurate ledger can now be maintained without a single central point where that information is stored, maintained, or updated. Registrars? Notaries? You might as well be talking about farriers and chimney sweeps. So how does it work? And what does it do? Mike Maloney, the filmmaker behind the popular Hidden Secrets of Money documentary series, describes it this way.
The system that Bitcoin runs on is called blockchain. Think of it as a modern version of an old-fashioned bookkeeping ledger, but instead of a handwritten list of entries and calculations, a blockchain is a digital list of entries and calculations. A block is simply a bundle of transactions. Think of a block as a whole page of transactions in the old-fashioned ledger. A blockchain is just a chain of blocks. It's the same as a whole series of pages in the old-fashioned ledger. Easy, huh? Here's how it works. The Bitcoin blockchain actually exists in every one of the millions of computers on the network as exact copies of each other. However, for this example, so that we can zoom in and you can really see just how a blockchain works, I'm going to show it as one giant blockchain in the middle of a small network of computers. Let's follow a pizza transaction with Bitcoin. When the transaction occurs, it first appears on the network in a pool of unconfirmed transactions, along with thousands of others from all around the world. Millions of different computers from the network then gather some of these transactions and place them in their own blocks. The computers are all creating blocks constantly in the hope that theirs will be the next one added to the official chain. A new block is added to the chain every 10 minutes or so, when one of the computers wins the right to have its block recognized as the next in the chain and is rewarded with a prize of newly created bitcoins. The way a computer wins the prize is by trying to guess the answer to an extremely difficult math problem. In fact, the problem is so difficult that even with millions of computers making guesses billions or even trillions of times per second, it still takes roughly 10 minutes to find the answer. Once one of the computers guesses the correct answer and wins, all of the millions of computers on the network that did not win are instructed to throw away all the work they have done, update their ledgers with the block from the winning computer, and start again with a new math problem. In doing so, the computers use an immense amount of power and cost a literal fortune to run. So why do they do it? Because it can be very profitable. This is where the term mining for bitcoins comes from. Instead of striking gold by mining for precious metals in the wilderness, these computers are hoping to strike Bitcoin by mining precious numbers on the blockchain.
But talking about the blockchain is like talking about the printing press. Yes, it's revolutionary. Yes, it will change the course of history. But what specifically does it print? Well, whatever you want it to, of course. A papal bull or the 95 Theses, the 9/11 Commission Report or the Road to 9/11, a GMO cookbook or the Anarchist cookbook, colorful pieces of toilet paper or Federal Reserve notes, but I repeat myself. So what does the blockchain record? Well, whatever you want it to, of course. It can be used as a tool for creating smart contracts, or registering land ownership, or creating decentralized cryptocurrencies. This is where Bitcoin comes in. So what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer cryptocurrency whose transactions are recorded in a public blockchain ledger. There are 3 things to note about this description of Bitcoin. First, Bitcoin is just one application of the blockchain ledger technology. They are not the same thing. Bitcoin is not blockchain. Blockchain is not Bitcoin. Bitcoin uses the blockchain innovation to run an electronic payment system. It's important to stress this point. Confusing these terms is a purposeful tactic that a lot of 21st century snake oil salesmen are using to sucker a public that sees the Bitcoin bubble and believes this is the next great investment opportunity. This baffle them with BS technique has been ridiculously effective in some cases. In one infamous example, the Long Island Iced Tea Corporation recently rebranded as the Long Blockchain Corporation. They still make iced tea, they just added blockchain to their name, and the market responded. The company's stocks tripled overnight. This is the exact phenomenon we saw emerge during the dot-com bubble, when any company that added .com to their name saw their stock price rise. And it is a sure sign that people are being baffled by techno-speak that they don't understand in the slightest. Andreas Antonopoulos provides some straightforward advice for separating blockchain from BS.
So let's get started. What exactly is going on here? Is this the greatest technological innovation and explosion of innovation since the mobile internet, or maybe even the internet itself? Or is this the greatest load of hype ever arranged around a technology in the history of technology? Both. And in fact, that's a characteristic of advanced technologies. I often say that where Bitcoin and the other open blockchains are today is approximately where the internet is in 1992. In terms of technology, in terms of infrastructure deployment, in terms of adoption patterns, this technology is approximately where the internet was in 1992. But the hype around blockchain is exactly where the hype around the internet was in 1998. You know what comes next. There will be a shakeout. When the waters recede, you can tell who on the beach wasn't wearing a swimsuit. They stand there naked. It's an empty promise. This will happen in the blockchain space. There is a lot of bull being peddled to VCs, to investors, to initial coin offering buyers, to uneducated investors. There's a lot of Ponzi schemes. There's a lot of pyramid schemes. There's a lot of empty promises. There's also a lot of business as usual disguised as innovation, disguised as disruptive technology. Now, out of that came this fantastic saying, blockchain is the technology behind Bitcoin, which is incorrect. Blockchain is one of the 4 foundational technologies behind Bitcoin, and it can't stand alone. But that hasn't stopped people from trying to sell it. Blockchain is Bitcoin with a haircut and a suit that you parade in front of your board. It's the ability to deliver a sanitized, clean, comfortable version of blockchain, of Bitcoin, to people who are too terrified of actually disruptive technology. And so you get into this very strange world where the words no longer mean anything. Can you define blockchain for me? I think a few people in this room could probably define blockchain, but the real challenge would be, can you define blockchain in such a way that I can't do search and replace with the word database and still make that sentence work? Because that's the challenge. If what you're doing is a database with signatures, it's not interesting. It's boring. What is the essence of Bitcoin? It's not blockchain. The essence of Bitcoin is the ability to operate in a decentralized way without having to trust anyone. The essence of Bitcoin is to be able to use software to authoritatively, independently, without appeal to authority, verify everything yourself. You don't trust the other nodes you're talking to. You assume they're lying. You don't trust the miners. You don't trust the people creating the transactions. You don't trust anything other than the outcome of your own verification and validation. And through that, you end up trusting in something more important, the network effect. Bitcoin introduced the concept of decentralized security through computation. And this has not yet sunk in. What Bitcoin does is it allows you to replace a security model that is based around concentric circles of access and control with an institution in the center, with a security model that is inside out, open and accessible to everyone, a security model that is based on market forces and game theory. It is the first market-based security model, where a series of incentives and punishments ensure that the ultimate result is you can trust the platform itself as a neutral arbiter that is not controlled by anyone, without third parties, without intermediaries. Bitcoin revolutionizes trust.
The second thing to note in our definition of Bitcoin is that it is a cryptocurrency. That means it uses cryptographic functions to secure and verify transactions on the network and to control the issuance of new units. Bitcoin conforms to a certain protocol, and that protocol defines the rules by which the Bitcoin network operates. You can tweak those rules and create similar but separate payment systems, each with its own qualities. These Bitcoin-like cryptocurrencies are called altcoins. Thirdly, Bitcoin uses a specific kind of blockchain ledger called a public or permissionless blockchain. This means anyone can join the network and contribute to the maintenance of the ledger, mining in the Bitcoin parlance. There is another kind of blockchain called a private or permissioned blockchain that requires nodes to be invited to join the network or otherwise given permission to participate in maintaining the ledger. And as a further level of analysis, it should be noted that all cryptocurrencies are digital currencies, but not all digital currencies are cryptocurrencies. Oh, and then there's virtual currencies, which are technically speaking another thing altogether. Okay, this is starting to get confusing, isn't it? This is about the point where we'd need to bust out the Venn diagrams and start coloring the overlapping parts, right? Well, if you followed all of this, good for you. If not, don't sweat it. The point for today is simply to recognize that there are a lot of separate but related concepts here, and to talk about them as if they are all just one big monolithic thing is not just unhelpful, but purposefully misleading. So, with all of this in mind, let's look at those Bernanke headlines again. Former chairman of Federal Reserve to speak at blockchain conference. And Ben Bernanke, Bitcoin has serious problems. Are you at least beginning to get a handle on how these headlines are not contradictory? How it could be that a central banker could be interested in blockchain technology, but dislike the Bitcoin application of that technology? If not, think of it this way. The same DVD player that can play Century of Enslavement can also play The Federal Reserve and You. The same printing press that can print Crossfire, the plot that killed Kennedy, can also be used to print the Warren Commission report. The same web browser that can take you to CorbettReport.com can also take you to nytimes.com. And no, I'm not recommending that you go there. So yes, the blockchain could be used to create digital currencies that represent the very vision of a totalitarian tyrant's wildest wet dream. Central banks could use private blockchains to administer national digital currencies that permanently record and track every transaction in the economy. That currency could be distributed through government-issued digital wallets that act as an individual ID and allow the government to track everything you ever purchase back to you personally. It could be used to create the perfect system of panoptic oversight, and the totalitarians could, as sole proprietors of the private blockchain, target anyone they saw as a threat for removal from the economy by simply revoking their wallet. And yes, the blockchain could be used to create a digital currency that represents the bankster's worst nightmare. Free individuals could use a public blockchain to create a cryptocurrency not issued by or subject to any central authority. Or they could use it to raise untaxable crypto funds for agoristic startup ventures through unregistered ICOs. Or it could be used to transfer value or property instantaneously across the imaginary lines on the map that define the supposed boundaries of the would-be tyrants' geographical monopolies without the permission of said tyrants. Are you starting to get the picture? A gun can be used by a jackbooted minion of the police state to murder you and your family, or it can be used by you to defend yourself and your family. It is a tool, just like the blockchain, and can be used for good or for ill.
So, what I'd like to equip you with is a set of criteria to understand when you are being presented with something, perhaps to invest, or to be employed, or to engage in some way. And it calls itself a blockchain, or a distributed ledger, or one of these other names that are coming out. How can you tell? Blockchain or bullshit? They both start with a B. What's the difference? If you can replace the word blockchain with database and the brochure reads the same, it's business as usual. It's not decentralized. It's not borderless, neutral, censorship resistant, open. It reestablishes trust in intermediaries. It's just a database. And that is not disruptive. The idea that we're going to take this technology and use it to improve the operating margins of centralized institutions of trust so that they can continue business as usual, I'd say it's abhorrent, but that's a strong word. It's just boring. Really, really boring. No one got into this in order to make a few billions for a financial services clearinghouse. And if you did, I'm really sorry. That's boring. What's really exciting is the possibility of fundamentally changing the way we allocate trust on this planet, opening up the ability to collaborate, transact, engage on a global level with everyone. Simply by means of downloading an application, you can become part of a giant platform of trust that doesn't care who you are or where you came from, that doesn't require permission to participate or innovate, where a 12-year-old JavaScript programmer has the same influence as power as JP Morgan Chase. More, in fact, because they're doing open source and feeding into a community of collaboration that is creating a tsunami of innovation. Taking this technology and using it to strengthen the same centralized institutions so that they can improve their bottom line is boring. That is not what blockchain is. That's just a database. And it doesn't change anything. In fact, there are some rather disturbing possibilities in this model. Let's think about it for a second. The most commonly expressed application for these new distributed ledger technologies is to replace the function of a centralized clearinghouse with a consortium of n participants, where n is 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, known, permissioned, controlled participants, who will assemble transactions and sign them rather than compete through market forces in a security model like Bitcoin, We discard currency as the underlying mechanism for building market-based security. We discard proof of work as wasteful because all it allows you to do is decentralized, secure, neutral, censorship-resistant blockchain. And we trust 5 named parties to sign transactions. At that point, they don't need to assemble these transactions in blocks. They can just sign the individual transactions. They don't need to chain them together, because absent proof of work and a system of currency incentives, rewriting that is easy. There's no immutability. So it's not a blockchain anymore, because there's no blocks and there's no chain. Now that's at a technical level, but let's look at the more important level. What do you achieve by replacing a clearinghouse with a consortium of players? You know, there's something unique a clearinghouse does. If you understand the role of a clearinghouse, one of its most important functions is that it is not a participant in the market. It has no skin in the game. The New York Stock Exchange is not an active trader. That's not an accident. That's called separation of concerns. The clearinghouse is an independent party with oversight that is not a market participant. If you take that party out and replace it with 5 banks, all of which have skin in the game, how do you run a consensus algorithm when the incentives to cheat, front-run, manipulate the market, and break the consensus rules, even adversarially against the other 4 parties, are so high? There's no incentive to keep the consensus rules. All you're doing is you're saying, trust us. We're in a consortium. Trust us? These 5 banks? Where were you in 2008? Where were you when Libor was fixed? Where were you when the gold markets were fixed? Where were you when front-running and high-frequency trading was creating these monsters of crony capitalism? Trust us? Hell no. Removing the clearinghouse and replacing it with, what's the word? It's not consortium. Cartel, that's the word. With a cartel of the same market makers who have manipulated and compromised every market in history, and doing that in a way that closes this from transparency. That's not a recipe for efficiency, immutability, security, transparency. That's not a blockchain. That's a bullshit. It's a very profitable bullshit. It requires you to have confidence in the game. A con game, as it's known. Be careful what you evaluate when you see these technologies taking something whose fundamental purpose is to remove trusted intermediaries and create an open, borderless, neutral system, and turning it into a tool for a bunch of untrustworthy trusted parties to manipulate markets is going to be a disaster. And they're going to do it.
Now, let's look once again at the statements that opened this podcast episode. Is the blockchain revolutionary? Well, since no decentralized peer-to-peer ledger has ever existed before, yes, it is that rarest of rare things. Something new under the sun. Is Bitcoin Tulipmania 2.0? Yes, in the exact same sense that the dot-com bubble of the 90s was Tulipmania 2.0. Just as Pets.com and other ventures that earned and lost hundreds of millions of dollars in the blink of an eye were the result of a speculative frenzy, so too are the sudden run-ups and rundowns in Bitcoin's price the result of a speculative frenzy. But the bursting of the dot-com bubble wasn't the end of the World Wide Web, any more than a future bursting of the Bitcoin speculation bubble will be the end of cryptocurrency, or even Bitcoin. Is cryptocurrency a nail in the coffin of the banksters? Yes. Cryptocurrencies can now be and already are being used by millions around the world for instantaneous and virtually free international remittances, all without the aid of a bank account. Startups have raised billions of dollars in capital through ICOs without a VC predator or investment bank underwriter in sight. More broadly, a whole host of banksters and their associated cronies in the third-party middleman parasitic class are already openly contemplating the fact that they have already been made obsolete by the blockchain technology which underlies the cryptocurrency boom. So is the blockchain the one and only silver bullet that will end banking all by itself? Don't be ridiculous. But it is one more arrow for the quiver. Is digital currency a tool of the totalitarian tyrants? Well, we've already seen how the BIS is musing about central bank-issued cryptocurrencies, and we've contemplated how that nightmare scenario of control and surveillance might unfold. It hardly takes a Nostradamus to envision how the forces of centralization are going to push as hard as they can to put the cryptocurrency genie safely back in the bottle of central bank-issued fiat. Are any of these statements contradictory? Nope. But the Bitcoin Psyop might have made you think they were. And now, you know better. So, here's a test of your newfound, nuanced understanding of the intricacies of digital currencies. Can you explain how this headline, China's central bank has begun cautiously testing a digital currency, and this headline, China is shutting down all of Beijing's Bitcoin and cryptocurrency exchanges, are perfectly compatible? If so, then give yourself a pat on the back. You've just seen through the Bitcoin Psyop.
Hello everyone, James Corbett here, CorbettReport.com. Speaking of flying and the TSA and other experiments in evil, I hope you have seen the most recent episode of the Corbett Report. If not, the link will be in the show notes so you can go and check it out. And of course, I was talking about the security theater that has been set up in the United States since the infamous day. And here I am at a Japanese airport about to take a domestic flight just here in Japan. And I can attest there is nothing quite like the TSA here, although there are obviously security procedures that have obviously changed in the last decade or two for obvious reasons. Security theater is a worldwide part of the global control rollout, so it is everywhere. But I can also attest that here in Japan, domestically anyway, the flight screening procedure is considerably less stress-inducing than in the United States. I think part of what is going on with regards to these security procedures that we do is propaganda. It is an important part of the security theater. And the security rollout, the psyop, the conditioning to expect the rigmarole at security is part of that propaganda rollout. And I hope you'll have picked up on that in the report that I did, again, the TSA and other experiments in evil, where I cited a number of local newscasts talking about different aspects of this and people getting upset about security procedures at different times over the last decade or two. But interestingly, I think one of the final clips was about a boy who flagged basically every time he flew because of his name being on a list or something, you know, one of those deals. But he had a cochlear implant, so it was always a big rigmarole to go through the screening procedure and what have you. And they're interviewing various people, and you have that one guy that says basically, well, you know, you don't want to do it, but you just gotta go and follow orders.
Well, I mean, you got to follow the rules, but in the same regard, I think that I'd probably have some apprehension. I'd be a little bit upset about it.
Follow orders, indeed. And then later on, the father of this boy is talking about how, oh, it's no big deal, it's all right. And then the boy gets to one line of dialogue to say, well, you know, sometimes it's a bit uncomfortable. As if, well, who cares? Oh, ha, ha, ha. This little child is a little uncomfortable by the screening procedures. Shut up and take it. This is an obvious point about propaganda, but I want to stress it for anyone, because I think we all understand it, but it needs to be consciously realized that when they do those types of reports about how, oh, you know, no one really enjoys it, but you gotta do it, you just follow orders, and it's no big deal. When they do those types of reports, they clearly are manufacturing consent, because this is not normal to sit here and watch these screening molestation videos, essentially, or seeing it really happen in front of you and just sit there quietly. No human being reacts like that. It's funny, people sometimes ask me, James, you know, how do you do this day after day, talking about this horrible news and all these terrible things that that's going on in the world. How do you do it? And I don't know what the answer to that is. I just have some ability to analyze things critically and sort of detach myself from it. But I have to admit, this is one of those times where I just couldn't stomach it anymore after watching all of those TSA videos and all of the children screaming, I don't want to go to Disney World, don't touch me, and all of this horrible stuff. I just couldn't take it anymore. At a certain point, I just had to say, Brock, here's a bunch of videos. You just choose the ones, you know, that you think will fit in best, and I'll just approve them when they're ready. Because I just couldn't watch it anymore. It's horrible. It boils my blood to watch this, especially children going through these indoctrination training procedures. And that's what everyone, I think, normal people see and feel when they're participating in these events. Which is why, of course, they have to notch up the propaganda to 12 anytime they try to roll this out. And so they'll always have the report from the airport, and there might be one or two people going, you know, it's a bit uncomfortable, but in the end, you know, you got to follow orders. And that's the message they want you to take away from it. And unfortunately, it's exceptionally effective at making you feel that you are strange for not enjoying this or not putting up with it anyway. When it's the exact opposite, the vast majority of people are on your side in this. And you have to keep that consciously in mind. Just a little anecdote. I remember talking to someone who was covering the, it was just as they were rolling out the new Rapiscan, you know, naked body scanners. And so they were having one of those reporter, you know, at the airport asking everyone as they went by, you know, what do you think about this? And this person who I was talking to told me, they interviewed person after person after person. Must have been dozens and dozens of people. Every single one, this is stupid, I hate it, I'm not going to do this, I can't put up with this is terrible. One person goes, you know, it's for our own good, and I respect them, and I trust that they're doing the right thing, and they're trained professionals. Guess which one of those interviews they aired that night? Again, we all know that they do this, but it's another thing to see it and consciously realize whenever you are watching these reports, even if it's just background noise that you have flipped on in the background or whatever it is invading your consciousness, and they are manufacturing consent. Maybe I'm the weird one for thinking that this is unusual. You are not. And if you, in fact, you're the weird one if you can watch those videos of little children, whatever else being grabbed in the security procedures and not feel yourself literally shaking with rage, then you probably are the weird one. So keep that in mind. They are manufacturing consent with this type of propaganda. It's an exceptionally important thing to keep in mind. But we'll keep going on and exposing the propaganda for what it is, however stomach-churning it may be. James Corbett, CorbettReport.com.